Okay, so hopefully the last two videos, one I had no audio and the second one I hit pause on the way through. So hopefully we get through this one without any technical issues on my part. So today we're going to learn two tools. They're called Extrude, which is this one right here, and Revolve, which is this one right here. And that first tool we'll use is the Extrude tool. Basically, it takes a drawing and it turns it into a three-dimensional shape. And it kind of pulls it into a three-dimensional shape. So what we'll do first is we need to create some shapes that we want to pull through. And I'll need a sketch for that. So we'll create a new sketch. We'll choose this plane here. I'll create two shapes. I'll do a rectangle, and I'll start right in the center, and we'll do a 40 by 30 rectangle, and I want to do a circle, and this circle I will do right here, and we will do a 30 for a diameter. So I have a circle and a rectangle, and we'll finish that sketch. All right, so the extrude tool is found up here. It is this button right here. So if I click on it, it'll bring up a panel, and all of these fusion panels operate in the same way. They basically give you questions you need to answer, and you kind of work your way through them. Sometimes they start with the first thing you need to do already selected, which is pick what profile you want to extrude. There are two types of extruding. There's thin extruding and normal extruding. We can kind of see what that looks like in a second. So let's pick the profile. I'm going to pick the rectangle. So it says profiles, one selected. Now there's a bunch of options here. And it's the first one is, where do I want to start from? And often you want to start from where you're drawing from, which is where that sketch was. So that would be called the profile plane. You can also choose to offset it. If you choose to offset it, that means you want to start stretching it out some distance above or below that sketch, and you have to tell it what that distance is. The third option is to start at an object, and in that case you have to have some other object in your drawing that you want to connect to. In this case we don't, so that won't be useful for us. I'm just going to choose profile plane for the beginning. On the direction, when we extrude it, as you can see here, and I pull it up and I start to create that box, I can choose to only do one side, like it's here. I could have it be on two sides, so in that case I get an arrow on the bottom and I can stretch it downward also. Or I can say symmetric, which is whatever I stretch on the top I get on the bottom. So those are other ways in which you can stretch a single drawing into a three-dimensional shape. So just because you have a rectangle doesn't mean it's always going to produce something that is that rectangle. It depends on how you extrude it. Extent type. This is how far you want to go. Right now it's set to distance, and there is a distance here. And so as I pull, that distance changes, and we can type in a number if we want. We can also choose a to object, so that means we would stretch it to some object that we would select to. That's nice if you want to connect two things together. We don't have another object, so that's not a good option for us. And then the last thing is all, and that means what you'll do is you'll select an object and it'll punch its way through that object and travel all the way through from one side to another, which is nice when you want to create holes and things like that. For right now, we'll leave it at distance, and we'll go up, I don't know, 20 units. Now, if we were to choose this other option, the thin extrude, you'll notice that we get a new option down here, which is a wall thickness. And that shows you how thick the wall is. If we go from the top view, it's a 1 millimeter thick wall by default. You can change that wall thickness by just typing in a value. And you'll notice that another thing that I haven't talked about yet was this taper angle. The taper angle creates kind of an angle on the side of this. So if I was to make it something huge, like 10 degrees, you can see how it flares it outward. If you make it negative 10 degrees, it will bring it inward. Usually, yes, you can use taper angles to create new shapes, different kinds of prisms and stuff. Maybe that's something you want to do. But another thing that is sometimes when you're trying to fit one object into another and you print it in 3D, if those surfaces are perfectly flat, they don't generally fit very nicely. So sometimes you can create a little bit of a taper angle to make them fit nicer. There's another tool called the draft tool that does the same kind of thing, is it creates a small angle for when two surfaces are going to be touching each other. And the last thing is, what do we want to do when we extrude this object? New body is the default. If your extrusion collides with another body, it will default to cut, so it'll cut one out of another. Join merges it with anything else it touches. Right now there's nothing there. Intersect will look at the overlap and leave you with what's overlapping. And new component is for mechanical stuff that we're not doing in this class. So we'll just leave it at new body and we can hit OK. And then there we go. We have ourselves a little brick. Now you will notice that as soon as you do that extrude, our sketch of the rectangle and the circle disappeared. And that is because the Fusion tries to be helpful in saying, oh, you've extruded your thing, let's make it go away because you're done with it. Well, sometimes that's not the case. And so you'll have to go up to sketches and show your sketches back so you can see your two shapes. So now let's extrude this circle here, which will become a cylinder. So extrude. What profile? This profile. Start. I'll start it. Let's set it to offset. So I'm going to offset it, and I know that this is 20 millimeters high, so I'm going to offset this one 5 millimeters. And you can see the little arrow jumped up when that happened because that's going to start some distance away. We will do a one-side extrude, and the extent type is we will do to an object, and I'm going to click the top of the box. So what that did is it made it a really fast extrude that made them exactly the same. You know, this is now 5 millimeters up in the air, and it goes all the way to the top, so the two tops line up. So that just shows you what that looks like when you say to object, and it shows you that you have that object selected. And right now, the extend, this is for punching through objects and things like that. So I'll show you what that looks like here in just a second. So then I can hit OK, and you can see you have your two shapes there. So let's play around with that extending through an object. I need another sketch. So let's go create sketch. I'm going to I'll choose this same plane, and let's do this. I'm going to go over here. We'll create a line that way, and let's create a line this way. So I have two right-angled lines. Now I'm going to do what's called a fit point spline because I want a curvy line. So I'm going to create a interesting, possibly, curve here that starts at the top and ends at the bottom. And then the next thing I want to do is I'm going to create a rectangle. I'll have this rectangle be a little bit offset and slightly smaller than the original. And I'll hit Finish Sketch. So now I have this curvy shape and that. All right, so let's go to Extrude, and let's extrude this up. We'll extrude it up. Let's do 20 millimeters. And I hit OK. Made my sketch go away. I can bring it back. All right, then we'll hit extrude again. I'll choose this one. And I'm going to do a start as offset. Let's offset at 5 millimeters so it starts up in the air. And let's do a distance of 10 millimeters. So that way, when we look at it, you can see it's basically sitting in the middle of that curvy thing that I made. Um, and, and hit OK. So now I've got that rectangle there. So when we're extruding, um, we can push through these other objects by choosing some of those options that we were looking at before, which is the extent type. So in doing that kind of extrude, I'll show you that you don't always have to extrude from a drawing. So let's hide those sketches because we don't need them. And I'm going to hit extrude, and it says, what profile do you want to extrude? I'm going to choose the profile that's facing this crazy shape here. And that is this plane of the rectangle here. And then if I was to take this and drag it, you'll notice that it just kind of punches its way through there. That's kind of manually doing it, right? If I drag it this way, I'm actually deleting some of the original shape. That's why it's in red. Another thing is I can say extent type to object. So what object do I want it to go to? Well, I want it to go to this object right here. And now what you can see is you get a perfect matching of this rectangle with this curve here, and it makes it match up perfectly with no air gaps in between. That's the default, which is to the selected face. If you instead, well, yeah, it's not a, we won't do adjacent faces. That doesn't make sense for this one. But so it'll just say to this face, and you can see where it stops. Now, if I do extent all, you will notice that it actually goes further and punches all the way through right to the back face of this. It's not so obvious that that's the case because it's kind of hidden inside. I might be able to switch it to wireframe view. Let me go visual style, wireframe. No, that still doesn't show. So that doesn't show what I was thinking of. All right. So, but anyhow, we can extrude faces of existing objects and have them touch even complicated objects and make them match up perfectly, even when it's a hard shape like that. So you see that right now the default is to join these two. We could have them be two separate bodies. If we leave it as join and hit OK, then this will now be one body. And if we look at our bodies list, we have the original cube or rectangular cube or rectangular prism, I mean, cylinder, and then this other body that we just created. So what other things can we do? There's some interesting stuff that we can do with extruding. Let's go back to creating a cylinder. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this body here. I'm just going to slide it out of the way, and I'll hit OK. And let's show that our sketch is back. And let's hit extrude. And we can do some kind of interesting stuff here. So we're going to select this circle, and let's do direction to sides. Now you can see both sides there. And then on the top one, I will do extent type to object. So I'll extrude it to the top of the box. And I'll also do it with a taper angle of, I think we'll need it to be negative to do what I want to do here. We'll do a negative 5 degrees. Let's do negative 10 degrees. So it's a little more obvious. And then down below, I'll do it by distance. And so we'll stretch it out. And as I stretch it out, I'm going to make this taper angle here 20 degrees and hit OK. And so now you can kind of see, how just one circle can create a complicated object that has a changing taper profile and matches up to other objects if we want them to. The next thing that we want to look at is revolving, and what does revolving look like. So we'll need another sketch for this. So let's create a sketch right over here. So create sketch, and in this space what we'll do is I'll create a shape that looks, I don't know, maybe kind of like a weird backwards number 1. Do that here, there, and there we go. Now this did not line up the way I wanted it to, so I want this to be there. All right. So now we'll hit finish sketch. Okay. So I have this profile, and now I'm going to hit revolve. When you revolve something, you have to tell it what shape you want to revolve. So I'm going to, by default, it jumps straight to what axis you want to spin around. We'll talk about that in a second. So we'll pick the profile. So the profile, that's the first question. I click here, and then it says what axis. So I have to switch to that. What axis do I want to do? We have some built-in axes, which are I'm going to hide that prism here, and I'll hide that first sketch so you can see it. So we have this axis here. This is the y-axis. This is the x-axis. And then we have the z-axis. So those are built in. We can use those if we want. So if I say spin it around the y-axis, you can see how it spins it around the y-axis, and it keeps the distance that it originally was from the y-axis and creates a pretty complicated and interesting object. These objects, or one that looks like this, are often made out of rubber. They're called a grommet, and it will allow you to place an object in the hole, and this can fit into a larger hole and kind of provide some support for like a rod or a threaded thing or something like that that slides through here, so that way it doesn't move around in a larger hole. All right, so that's one option, is I could do that axis. Let's say we don't want that axis. I'm going to cancel that. You'll notice that I can actually pick axes that are on the drawing itself. This little line here is lighting up as I hover over it. So if I click on it, I can spin around that way. All right, looks similar, but it doesn't have the hole in the middle. So maybe this might be more like a plug that'll plug a hole, and this little notch here will help hold it in its place. If I hit the X, I can undo that and pick a different axis, like this one here. And so now I've got something like I don't know, some sort of disc-like shape with this in the middle. So you can maybe it maybe plugs into some other circular thing. Maybe it's the foot of the bottom of some object that sits on the floor, and this is like becomes adjustable if you put threads on this, and you can have an adjustable foot for the object that you're trying to support. So you can spin this around most any axis, but you have to be careful. If I try and pick an axis like this one here, which is this axis, it might complain, or it might not even let us do it. Yep, it's spinning and getting angry. And what it doesn't like about this situation is that it's basically trying to spin it onto itself, and it definitely doesn't like spinning and then colliding with itself. And now my whole mouse thing is stuck in mouse mode, which is wonderful. Um, so um, let's pause real quick and I'll fix that. Okay, so we're back now. Just had to restart Fusion so that way it would let go of my mouse. So what we're going to do is we will revolve this profile, and the axis that we'll choose will be the y-axis here, which is now not visible because it's hidden. So I'll click it right there, um, and hit OK. So now you got this crazy big thing there. All right, so now you've learned how to revolve an object. So this is your first skill check showing extrude and revolve. What I'm going to do now is show you quickly how to make a game piece and how quick you can make that game piece for 3D printing if you wanted to. So let's save our work here. Let's create a new drawing. Now what I'm going to do is I am going to go onto Google here and find myself an image of a chess pawn. So let's download one of those. And so, all right, I've downloaded a picture of a chess pawn, and I'm going to put it into my drawing here. In order to do that, I want to say Insert, Canvas. From my computer, here's that picture. Hit Open, and now it wants to know where I want to place it. Now I'm going to place that pawn on this surface here, and I can do the top view and see the picture of the pawn that I picked from Google, and then I'll hit OK. Now I've got this picture that I'm going to work with, but one of the things that you have to keep in mind is how big it is. This picture doesn't have any sense of scale at the moment, and so we need to make sure it's the right size. Pawns can be about 1.5 inches tall or so, depending on the chessboard. So 1.5 inches. If I right click on the canvas and say calibrate, I can pick the bottom of the pawn about and the top of the pawn, and then it gives me kind of like a measurement thing, and I want it to be 1.5 inches, IN. If you're in millimeters, which is the default, you have to put IN if you want it to be inches. And then I hit enter, and you'll notice that it gets a little bit bigger, and that's because it's now resized this canvas to be the correct size. So now if I 3D print whatever I create here, it'll be 1.5 inches tall. So the next thing we want to do is we're going to create a sketch. So we'll go to Sketch. We're going to choose this flat surface that has our picture in it. And we are going to first draw a line that goes from basically the top center of the pawn. It's almost the top center. It's a little bit off from the top center here. We can be probably a little closer maybe, and we'll try and do the top center right here. So we'll do right there, and we will go down here, and you'll notice see how it'll flash green with little hashes, and that means that it's parallel to that axis and it's straight up and down. That's what we want. So I'm going to click right there, and I'm going to hit OK. So I have my center line now. Notice that my center line does not match with the coordinates center line. That's okay. It's just the canvas is not perfectly centered. You can move the canvas, but I'm not worried about it right now. Next, we will hit Fit Point Spline. So Fit Point Spline, we're going to start with this point we created, and we're basically going to move our way around the pawn. It doesn't have to be perfect, but the more points you create, the better, especially when it gets tight. So if it gets tight adding a few extra points can make things look nicer. And so I add extra points on when it gets really turny. Middle mouse, if you're using a mouse or a pan. And then let's do this. I'm working my way down the pawn. This will only take a few more clicks. And then, so we're at this point. If I come back here, you see how it's all curvy. I don't like that curvy bottom. I'm going to stop right there. And then I'm going to draw a straight line that goes from this point to that point. All right, because I want the bottom of my pawn to be flat, and I don't mind if it's curvy in this space. In fact, you can actually take and we can modify these curves a little bit and adjust it a little bit. I'm going to click these and I want to tweak these curves just a tiny bit. I don't know if I like that. Let's actually just move this point there. There, I think that looks better. All right. So now I've drawn half of my pawn. Let's finish sketch. And then we will hide the canvas. We don't need it anymore. And we will go to Revolve. We will pick this profile, which we already had clicked on, so it's already got it selected, one selected. If you don't have it selected, then you would just click on it. Profile, one selected. Let's go to axis. What axis? I want this vertical axis, and it'll by default spin it around 360 degrees, and now you have a pawn that you can print, 3D print on, and it'll be the perfect size for your chessboard if you played chess.